podcast studio, and I'm talking with Alexis Rosenberg. She's a local attorney and our legal expert here at abc7. And I want to talk about the Maya case. Just a quick, perhaps, synopsis of what happened. In 2016, the Kowalski family took their 10-year-old daughter, Maya, to All Children's Hospital. She had been diagnosed with a rare disorder called complex regional pain syndrome. Maya had been receiving a drug called ketamine to help with her pain. The hospital doctors didn't agree with that treatment profile. When her mother, who was a registered nurse, insisted, they reported her to a child abuse hotline. The hospital suspected she was intentionally making her daughter sick. A judge took Maya away from the family, and after 3 months of not being allowed to even see her daughter, the mother took her own life. Enter the lawsuit filed by the Kowalski family. In 2013, after a 2-month trial, the jury found the hospital was negligent, a $261 million verdict. Alexis, you've seen the opinion by the Second Circuit Court of Appeal. What were the mistakes that the appeal court said that the trial judge made in this case?
There's a lot to unpack here, and it's quite a long order, as we know. So the main issue, or the main thing that you can really, if you want to break down that order, is that the court found that the hospital had immunity for the mandatory reporting. So hospitals have a mandatory reporting of child, if they have a reasonable belief that there is child abuse, to report that. And that is what the hospital did. So the appellate court said that based on what the evidence that was presented, that they believed that there was enough to meet that reasonable belief standard that there could be child abuse going on with Maya. And because of that, when you report under that mandatory statutory requirement, there is immunity, meaning that you cannot be sued because you reported if you believe there was reasonable belief that there was this child abuse. So that's what one thing they found. The other major thing they found is that they found that they didn't believe that the judge should have submitted to the jury for the punitive damages. And you mentioned that huge verdict, that large verdict, and they said that should have never been an option for the jury to consider. And they said that that basically they were going to reverse that. They were going to reverse that verdict. They did come back with a lot of other things that having to do with going through each of the claims and why. For instance, there was a claim for that was part of that verdict, that emotional distress, intentional emotional distress having to do with the mother, and they said no, there wasn't a basis for that. So that's kind of just in a nutshell breaking it down, because as you know, you read it too, it was a really long order, and we don't want to put everybody to sleep, but that's kind of
if they want to read it, it's on our website at mysuncoast.com. How unusual is this that an appeals court will just vacate a huge settlement, a huge judgment like this?
It's not as unusual as some may think. I think this case, it was on Netflix, and it was very, publicized, and it just, the circumstances of this case are just very upsetting for many, many different reasons. I have not watched the documentary, but, they're mostly because it's just so upsetting. We have to remember, Maya was only 10 when this happened, and she was more or less, kept because of the dependency court's order at the hospital for 3 months. She was released from the hospital about a week after her mother committed suicide. So she's there, they're treating her, and then there's allegations that were contained in the complaint and evidence that was presented, as well as the appellate court reviewed, having to do with the fact that, whether she was able to be kept there basically against her will for a certain period of the time, as well as if there was battery because she was forced to take pictures, more or less, this 10-year-old girl in her underwear, and factors as to whether the treatment that they provided to her, because her allegation is that she was in worse condition when she left the hospital than when she entered the hospital. And so all of those different factors are just so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But I mean, what this really got down to whether a hospital has immunity if they have a reasonable belief to report child abuse. Now, the father and the family was alleging that this was retaliatory in nature, the reporting, and that they didn't have a reasonable belief because she did present in the hospital. She was under the care of a physician.
Right. I mean, the diagnosis was done by a separate doctor who was not affiliated with the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I would think there'd be some sort of reasonable basis, but I guess the hospital staff just didn't agree, and the insistence of the mother to keep her on ketamine, I guess, was enough to trigger their suspicions.
Well, that is what they alleged,
Yeah.
and that in essence, this situation, I think there was more factors in that the appellate court looked at to make a determination that they believed there was based on the statute, the reasonable information that they had to go on to report it under that mandatory reporting. Now, the family is saying, no, there wasn't really, it didn't meet that reasonable standard because she was under the care of a physician, and the physician had prescribed the ketamine and the other treatment that she was receiving. It wasn't that the mother, who was a nurse, was giving her this illegally or giving her some sort of street, treatment on her own, that she was under the care of the physician. And this was more of a conflict of how to treat this chronic illness opposed to anything that should have rise to the level of that mandatory, triggering that mandatory reporting. Now, the appellate court disagreed on that, and so that means that the appellate court held that any actions related to that reporting, they had immunity. Now, that doesn't mean, and then also we have the situation that we had the dependency court come in and say that she had to stay at the hospital, and then the hospital gets immunity for that as well, the appellate court found, because they were following a court order from that dependency court related to who could come in and see her, related to the food that she was allowed to have, whether food was allowed in and out. In fact, her mother wasn't allowed to see her at all. The father had to have supervised visits, and her treatment as well. So the appellate court found that they had immunity with that. Now, anything outside of that, more or less, the appellate court has said the intentional infliction of emotional distress on Maya, the false imprisonment for certain days that didn't fall in that window, as well as the battery for the pictures, as well as any negligence related to her treatment. She still has those claims, but those punitive damages, that was the hammer clause that got us up to that $200+ million. That has been taken off the table, and the new trial, the punitive damages will not be put before the jury for them to be allowed to order those or put those on the verdict.
Right. Yeah. The new trial will be very limited in its scope compared to the original trial. It's just, I'm trying to remember what exactly what were the factors that they're going to be able to retry?
Well, they're able to retry the intentional emotional distress on Maya, not the mother. They're allowed to retry the battery on Maya, the false imprisonment for a window of days that didn't fall under when there was that dependency shelter order. There's a couple days in there, as well as the medical negligence that they have alleged as well. So there's quite a bit that's still there, and the testimony will probably be very similar. But the difference is the jury's not going to have the ability to order those punitive damages, and that's how we got to that 200. So they're going to actually have to prove the damages related to each one of those claims, and they won't get, that amplifier of the punitives that can be laid on top of that. There still could be a significant verdict that comes back, but the likelihood isn't. It's not going to be in the $100 million range.
Right. So one thing we were debating about it in the newsroom when this came down is, so like what happens now? The appellate court, they actually ordered a retrial, or will it, or is it somebody has to, does it, the family have to sue, or what? Take us through the process. What happens now?
So they reversed the verdict, and so it's basically goes back down. There's some procedural and administrative things that happen, but it basically goes back down to the trial court. Because right now our court systems are kind of set up in levels, and it was heard at the trial level. That's where we got the verdict. They appealed to the appellate level, which is a different level. You write a brief. There's 3 judges that are deciding. There's a hearing but not in the sense that you see on TV where you have the jury and you're putting on evidence. The appellate judges can ask the attorneys questions in the brief, that sort of thing. And so now it's being sent back with basically these instructions from them that you can't have punitive damages, and you can't have the claim regarding the mom, and you can't have this, but you're allowed to have this. And now go back down, start all over again with these new guidelines that have come out from the appellate. But they reversed that 200-plus verdict, so that is off the table at this point. And we'll have to see what the new jury is going to award.
Yeah, same court, but probably not the same judge, or the same judge, or
it could be before the same judge. Obviously, it's going to be a different jury, but it could go before a new judge. It could go before the same judge.
Typically, how long does this take to go through and for a new trial to start?
So it depends on a lot of various factors, because it'll depend on the judge that's assigned to docket that they have. It depends on various factors. But is this going to happen within the next 6 months? No.
Okay. Alexis Rosenberg, thanks for joining us. Help us put a little bit of this in perspective and help us understand this very, very sad case.
It really is a sad case. This is a little girl that was, and if you read the details and the evidence that was presented, it is so, so horrific. And just to know that little 10-year-old girl was in the hospital, and she was, in pain and going through this, and didn't have access to her mother, who she was so close to, and then to find out that her mother, who was so distraught over losing her, took her own life, and now she's navigating this world from the trauma of that, coupled with the fact of not having a mother. It just is heartbreaking.
Alexis, thank you.
Thank you for having me.